So this is Elizabeth. This is our port-style wine, our dessert wine, and it's got an interesting backstory behind it. So one, my mom is named Elizabeth, and she has always liked what we do with our ports, and so we named it after her. When we bought the winery, the previous owner had been making a port-style wine from Merlot. And it was always a perennial bestseller. And we looked at some ways we could make it even better. And so starting with the 2010 vintage of Merlot, we started what has grown into a pretty sizable Solera-style approach to making this particular bottling of our port-influenced Elizabeth. So what we do is we make a little bit each year. We stop the fermentation with some alcohol after pressing it off, and then we put it into a barrel. So every year a new barrel gets made, and then prior to bottling, we blend all of those barrels together and pull out what we need for that specific bottling, and then everything goes back in its blended form back into barrel. So what we have is, from 2010 all the way through 2018 with this particular bottling, bits and pieces of that vintage made into the same style and then bottled up. So in some ways, it's a running history of our time here with this winery. It's kind of a sentimental wine, and we can't legally call it a port, but it is certainly in that style. Now, some things that we do throughout the year, typically with our red wine program, we'll periodically check the levels of sulfur. We will top up the barrels to make sure that they're full. We don't want there to be any risk of oxidation or Brettanomyces starting to grow because the alcohol is lower and the sulfur is too low in our standard red wine program. With this, however, because of the fortification that happens with spirits, and incidentally, the spirits come from wines we've made that then we have worked with distillers to distill to give us that base. The alcohol is high enough that there's a lot of things that we don't have to worry about microbiologically. So Brett isn't really a concern. And oxidation isn't a concern for me either. So once we refill those barrels, we put the bung on them, they will sit until the next time we blend and then barrel back down. And it's because I like the subtle oxidation that happens over the period of the year to that wine. And we also know that there's always going to be new wine that gets added to it with every subsequent year. So throughout this process, we've reached a point where we're making a much more consistent product, but for some reason, and I can't explain it, I think it gets more delicious every year. It probably has to do with the age, because every year there is much more of a concentrated aged component that becomes part of the base of this wine. So let's go ahead and taste. I mean, right on the nose, it's this kind of combination of sweetness and intensity of black fruit. The blueberries there, it's largely, like I said, a Merlot base. The alcohol is there. It's a prominent part of this wine, but it's not overbearing. We target the finished alcohol of this wine to be right around 18%. It's why she loves it. Sweetness combined with richness, density on the palate. The alcohol leaves just this subtlest, gentle burn on the mouth. It's the sort of wine that when you live in a cold climate like the Finger Lakes, you just need to have around in the winter. But it also is a great wine for the summer, especially when we're sitting around the fire pit or next to the lake and that breeze is coming off and you're just looking for something to warm the soul a bit. So it's a sentimental wine, but it means a lot to our family. And Here's to you, Mom.